You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 14th of January 2026 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, coming to you live from Studio 1 here at Midori House in London. I'm Andrew Muller. Coming up on today's programme, Japan's new Prime Minister prepares to seek a mandate of her own. Also ahead, the Iranian regime attempts to resist a national wave of protests, but cannot expect much support from its nominal ally China. We'll also round up the latest business headlines, and ahead of a new exhibition of Richard Avedon's portraits of the American West, we'll speak to the photographer's curator and granddaughter. All that coming up right here on The Briefing on Monocle Radio. And welcome to today's edition of The Briefing with me, Andrew Muller. Japan's first female Prime Minister is to tempt the prospect of becoming one of its shortest serving. Sanae Takaichi, who became Prime Minister on being voted into the leadership of the Liberal Democratic Party 86 days ago, is expected to call an early general election, probably on February 8th or 15th. It would be both an admission of weakness and a demonstration of confidence. In the last couple of years, the LDP has lost its majorities in both houses of the Diet, making actually governing difficult, but polls and bookmakers seem convinced that Takaichi would win a handy mandate in her own right. I'm joined with more from Tokyo by Tomohiko Taniguchi, Special Advisor, Fujitsu Future Studies Center and former Special Advisor to Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Tomohiko, this is not entirely official yet, as I understand it, but is there any doubt about it? Will Japan go to the polls next month?
Actually, earlier today, in the evening hours, Japan time, Prime Minister Takaichi spoke with a number of key figures within her own party and with the other party that's a coalition partner. And she let it be known clearly that she is going to dissolve Japanese parliament, lower house, soon, and call a snap election. So it's official now.
I mean, is there any doubt at all about what the result will be? How big a gamble is she taking here?
Any election, especially calling a snap election, is a gamble. But interestingly, Nikkei stock index today has hit its historical high. And I think the conventional wisdom now holds that Takaichi is going to win a sizable victory in the elections.
How much of that is due to her personal appeal, though? Because her personal approval ratings are pretty extraordinary, certainly by the standards of modern democracy. She's currently polling at around 70% overall, and according to some polling, 92% among 18 to 29-year-olds. What is it people are responding to?
If it is unusual for any democratic governed administration, that's even more so in the case of Japan, because honeymoon in Japan tends to be extremely short, and the honeymoon that Takaichi enjoys so far has been very much long compared to certainly Japan's average, and she is determined to capitalize on her unusual, quote-unquote, popularity ratings, which is understandable.
I mean, is it clear what the key to that popularity is, though? There has, of course, been an amount of interest attached to the fact that she is Japan's first female prime minister, but it can't just be that, surely.
Some of the reasons are reflection on the inability of some of the previous government's attempts when it comes to delivering policies. And it also is true that in this age of social media, Takaichi is better qualified in disseminating her own messages to cater to younger generations. So coupled with those, I think she is enjoying an enormous amount of popularity ratings. But time is running up for her. Honeymoon must end sometime, and she has to move quickly before the honeymoon period ends.
You allude there to the question of policies. Is it clear yet what her platform for this election would consist of? Maybe specifically things that she would like to do, but feels like she cannot without those majorities?
The Japanese gasoline prices have elaborately been made higher due to the taxation. Takaichi, in her early days, has chosen to get rid of that taxation. So over the year-end and the beginning of the year period, when a lot of people in Japan go and about using cars, they have felt that the cost of gasoline has been reduced quite substantially. I think that's one of the reasons why she has decided to take advantage of that public feeling.
I mean, does foreign policy figure much in Japanese elections? There's certainly a conventional wisdom in the West, or certainly in Europe and the United States, that there are few, if any, votes in it. But obviously, in the current context, there is increased conversation about Japan normalizing its defense arrangements. Is that likely to come up, and is that something she's going to run on?
That's very much going to be a big agenda with which she is going to call the snap election. So far, she has done quite a remarkable job in cementing her relationships with one of the most difficult leaders of the world, namely the President of the United States. And given the fact that the neighborhood relationship that Japan has had with South Korea has been with a lot of troubles, the recent bilateral summit meeting that's just ended between South Korean President and Japanese Prime Minister Takaichi has been quite well received by the general public as well. So she is, at the moment, known to be someone capable of handling diplomatic issues. Even the row between China and Japan has worked in her favor.
And just finally, obviously there is a daunting task here for Japan's opposition running against a prime minister who has both a certain novelty value and high personal ratings. But where might they see weaknesses? What will they run against?
They are running on a platform that Takaichi has chosen not to deliver what she has pledged to deliver. So she is making a lie to the nation. That's something that opposition party leaders already have chosen to say publicly.
Tomohiko Taniguchi, thank you very much for joining us. That was Tomohiko Taniguchi, Special Advisor at the Fujitsu Future Studies Center and former Special Advisor to Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. You're listening to The Briefing. Here is Tom Webb with the day's other headlines.
Thanks, Andrew. Tehran has warned Washington's allies in the Middle East that it will strike US bases on their soil if the US were to attack Iran. This comes after President Donald Trump threatened to intervene as protests in the nation face a harsh crackdown from the clerical establishment. The death toll from the unrest has risen to almost 2,600, according to rights groups. Beijing has reported the world's largest ever trade surplus at just over €1 trillion. It's the first time China's full-year trade surplus has passed this amount, beating 2024's record figure. High-end department store conglomerate Saks Global has filed for bankruptcy protection. The move comes just a year after a deal that brought Saks Fifth Avenue, Bergdorf Goodman and Neiman Marcus under the same roof. Stores are set to remain open for now after the US retailer finalized a $1.75 billion financing package and appointed a new CEO. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Andrew.
Thanks, Tom. You are back with The Briefing on Monocle Radio. Time now for a roundup of the business news. I'm joined, as we so very often are, by Bloomberg reporter Ewan Potts. Ewan, there is data out today about China's trade balance. Is this a pretty strong set of numbers we're looking at?
Hello, Andrew. Yeah, certainly is. If President Trump's tariffs were aimed at crimping Chinese exports, well, the evidence so far is that they have failed to do that. China ended 2025 with a record trade surplus, exports minus imports coming in at $1.2 trillion last year. The resilience of China's exports really something of a surprise given the ailing state of China's economy. And looking at the latest data, exports actually picked up last month. Economists were forecasting a decline. So really solid numbers out of China. And it's even more remarkable given the high comparison base from a year ago. You remember a year ago we were talking, much as we are now, about Trump's tariffs. And Trump's re-election to the presidency sparked a huge amount of panicked front loading of orders. So Chinese factories are working overtime a year ago. So there's a very strong comparison. So you would expect perhaps some sort of decline compared to a year ago. But no, they've gone up again. And within the detail, there is a surge of exports of high-end goods. I think that shows the headway that China's making in moving up the value chain. And particularly notable was its shrinking imports of products like cars. Also worth digging under the surface of the numbers, and there's something here to please the President of the United States. 2025 did see a deepening contraction in sales to the US, but the slack more than picked up in shipments to Southeast Asia and Europe particularly, but also to other regions of the world. So the thing that was predicted by a lot of trade experts this time last year, that China would start to divert its exports to other parts of the world. Well, it does look like that has happened. And looking at the wider measure of the current account surplus, that's a measure of trade in goods and services. Well, the IMF reckons that will hit 3.3% of GDP last year, and that would be the highest surplus since 2010.
I feel like we should attach the always interesting question to any figures emerging from China, which are how seriously can they actually be taken? Do people regard statistics issued by the Chinese Communist Party as something they can literally and metaphorically bank on?
Well, I think it's broadly fair to say that we do trust the broad picture when it comes to these figures, and I think some of the data, some of the more what would you say, the less bigger picture stuff, I think you perhaps need to look at quite carefully. But when it comes to these big numbers on trade, I think that the numbers are pretty reliable, and most analysts tend to take them as broadly something we can rely on.
Well, sticking with the theme of trade, we are also awaiting a Supreme Court judgment on some of President Trump's tariffs. How big a jolt could they make to markets one way or the other?
Yeah, it's really fascinating, this. The question is whether the court will strike down a key portion of Donald Trump's tariff campaign. Now, it's not all of the tariffs, but it is quite a big part of the tariff policy. The court's weighing whether Trump can use an emergency law that had previously never been wielded to impose import taxes. Now, lower courts already ruled last summer that Trump exceeded his authority by invoking the 1977 International Emergency Economic Powers Act to justify his sweeping reciprocal duties targeting America's trading partners. Remember that lengthy list of tariffs unveiled last April outside the White House. Also under threat are separate levies aimed at China, Canada and Mexico. But for now, all of these tariffs do remain in effect as the legal proceedings slowly work their way through the American system. Bloomberg Intelligence puts the chances of the tariffs being struck down at about 60%. So there is a decent chance that the court will rule against President Trump. And if the tariffs are struck off, then it is potentially very messy for the administration. Over $100 billion have been collected in tariffs, and there'll be a lot of people knocking on the door saying, I want my money back. So it will be complicated, and it will be really uncharted territory. Now, exactly when we get this ruling is a bit of a mystery. It could come as soon as today, but I'm told by people who understand the US Supreme Court better than me, which is many people, that it could take a lot longer than that. I think the one thing we can be certain of is if they are struck down, the occupant of the White House will not take it lying down, and he will be robust in the defense of his flagship trade policy. And in fairness, there are many other avenues that he can try to reinstigate the tariffs, keeping them in place.
Ewan Potts at Bloomberg, thank you for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. It is very nearly 20:15 in Beijing, 12:15 here in London. You're listening to The Briefing. It remains difficult to understand exactly what is occurring inside Iran, never welcoming of independent reporting at the best of times and currently subject to an internet blackout. It is certain that the Iranian regime is being seriously challenged and is responding with customary brutality, neither for the first time. What may prove telling is the attitude of Iran's allies, possibly most crucially China, which is Iran's top trading partner, but which may be pretty indifferent to the survival of the Ayatollahs. Well, I'm joined with more by Austin Ramsey, Hong Kong-based reporter for the Wall Street Journal. Austin, up until the moment these latest protests started, what was the relationship between Tehran and Beijing looking like?
Well, as you mentioned, Andrew, China is Iran's biggest trading partner. Iran for China is one of its most important partners in the Middle East, and supplies it with oil as the main import that China receives from Iran. So they have a positive relationship. I think 5 years ago they agreed to a 25-year economic plan that called for deepening of trade and investment, and I don't think they really have reached the numbers they have hoped to achieve thus far. So there's been some limits, in no small part due to sanctions on Iran, which make it incredibly difficult for them to trade, to sell goods, to receive investment. So they're generally, like-minded on international issues, but again, perhaps not as close as either side would wish for.
I mean, leaving aside the economic relationships they have, would Beijing care really one way or the other who actually runs Iran?
Not to a great degree. I mean, I think China's primary interest is economic. And so the details of who runs the country aren't incredibly important to them. Obviously, they want a friendly partner, a sympathetic government in Tehran. But who exactly it is and the nature of that government is not hugely important to Beijing.
So if we understand that, one assumes the Ayatollahs do. That being the case, what kind of support might they be hoping, perhaps expecting to receive from China?
Well, I think that they're hoping for whatever they can get. I think the most obvious hope is just for greater investment, greater economic support. The Iranian economy is collapsing, so any support they can get would be incredibly welcome. And they've made indications that they want any help they can get on that front.
But for all the indifference that China may possess to who is actually, regarding who is actually in charge in Iran, does China have any interest beyond the purely economic in the Middle East? Is there anything else they're trying to advance that they think Iran is useful for?
Well, they want some sympathetic partners. They generally agree with Iran in the sense that they don't welcome a Western-led, a U.S.-led world order, and they feel it puts them at a great disadvantage. They both, suffer under sanctions from the U.S., Iran, of course, much more greatly, but they don't like a world order where the U.S. can so greatly interfere with their economies. So, to the extent that the Iranian regime, agrees with them on that, they very much see eye to eye. So that is definitely something that they would be looking for in a government in Tehran, and in any country that they work with. Obviously, the degree that countries believe that it varies a lot, but that is something they appreciate.
And just finally, on the subject of sanctions and related penalties, you will be aware, of course, that US President Donald Trump has threatened to stick another 25% worth of tariffs on countries still trading with Iran, which obviously very much includes China. Will that have flustered Beijing at all, or have they got to the point of sort of tuning these threats out?
Well, it's hard to say. It's hard to say what will happen with that latest tariff threat. Obviously, China, is harshly critical of the various tariffs that the U.S. has imposed, and they've been able to, in some ways, shrug them off. We've seen the latest trade numbers from Beijing, and they've done quite well despite Trump's tariffs. There was a sort of a trade détente reached last year between the two sides. Trump is expected to go to China in April, so it does seem unlikely that he'll want to upend all of that, which this tariff could potentially do. So I think while Beijing responded pretty quickly and criticized these latest tariff threat with a very similar language to what they've used in the past, I think they are, taking a bit of a wait and see approach and trying to gauge the seriousness of this latest threat.
Austin Ramsey in Hong Kong, thank you for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio with me, Andrew Muller. Finally on today's show, over the course of a 6-decade career, Richard Avedon photographed many things and many people. But if he is recalled for one particular project, it is the work he did in the late 1970s to early 1980s, which was eventually packaged as In the American West. Using an old-school 8x10-inch camera, Avedon shot portraits of more than 1,000 ordinary Americans. 126 made the cut, and 21 of them are to get another showing at the Gagosian Grosvenor Hill in London. Well, I'm joined now in the studio by Caroline Avedon, archivist at the Richard Avedon Foundation and curator of Richard Avedon Facing West. Caroline, first of all, alert listeners will have noticed that similarity in surname. Do you remember much of your grandfather?
Yes, I do. He passed away when I was quite young, but I have a very vivid memory of him. He was incredibly vivacious and loud and fun, and I remember fondly of him, and I'm grateful to just have this experience, yeah.
I mean, going back to the project, why did he go west in the first place? It wasn't an obvious thing for him to do.
He was approached by Mitch Wilder, who was the founding curator and person of the Amon Carter Museum in Fort Worth, Texas, and he actually commissioned the project. He wanted Avedon to come and take photos of women in the West, and Avedon thought, well, if I'm going to go there, I'd like to take photos of everybody. So he drove around in a Chevy Suburban with Laura Wilson and 2 photo assistants through state, finding people on the road. And his big thing was that he didn't know what he was looking for because he hadn't spent much time out there. He's a born and raised New Yorker, and he wanted a new experience and to be able to show America in a new way, I
mean, he definitely would have had something at the time to work against, because the American West has, of course, its own stock of photographic cliches, the big skies and the big hills and the wide open plains. And I realise I'm on the verge of reciting the lyrics to America the Beautiful here, but none of that is in the portraits. Absolutely none of it. It is all about the people on plain white backgrounds. Do you know when and why he made that decision?
Well, I think there's a common misconception that Avedon was only a fashion photographer and advertising, and he did portraiture for years before that. And so I think the portraiture aspect really comes through in these images. He talks about not wanting to do the Hollywood depiction of the West that we knew in movies and Wild West, posters and things like that. So I think showing people on a white background, kind of, you don't know where they are unless you read their caption and their story, gives the actual people in their faces the time to shine as opposed to the background and where they are. Yeah.
Do we know much about how he pitched his project to the subjects? This fancy pants fashion photographer from New York City turning up in these tiny towns all over the American West and ushering some coal miner or petrol station attendant in front of his camera. Those must have been quite strange conversations.
Yes. I mean, what's amazing about the project is no one really knew who he was. So he would say, my name's Richard Avedon. I'm from New York. I'd like to take your picture. And a lot of people, I think what makes it so unique today to look back on these images, I don't think this project could be replicated. The amount of trust it took between a random sitter and a random man taking their photo is incredible. Nowadays, I think if someone came up to me on the street and said, I'd like to take your picture, I'd go, oh, I don't know about that.
But I was wondering about that, though, from, I guess, the other angle, because the other reason I think that doing a project like this would be difficult now is that everybody photographs themselves and each other more or less constantly. It would not be interesting or surprising, I think, for someone to have their picture taken now. But for a lot of these subjects, it clearly was.
Yes, a lot of these people a lot of them actually talk about how they felt never seen before, and that Avedon gave them a chance to kind of tell their story within their image. And I think that's very beautiful.
Do we know much about what effect featuring in this very famous exhibition or collection of works had on any of the individual subjects?
It's funny you ask. I'm not too sure about the effect, rather than I was recently reached out by one of the subjects' daughter-in-laws, and it was just really cool to get some stories from her husband that knew Avedon, because Avedon kept relationships with several of the subjects after the fact, and we have correspondence at the Richard Avedon Foundation between people, and I know a lot of them still have their portrait. I know someone who has it in a safe because he's terrified something will happen to it, and I think a lot of them it changed their perception of themselves, I think. Yeah.
But do you think it has changed perceptions of the American West and perhaps Avedon's own work as well? Because there is now God help us, what year are we up to? 2026. There's 40 years of history attached to these works now. Do you get the sense they're thought of differently now to how they were when they first appeared?
Yes and no. I think they're still incredibly relevant. America is a little chaotic at the moment, and these images, I think, bring back a sense of that we're all the same in a way, that yes, we may think differently, we have different views, but when you're looking at someone when they've dropped their mask just in front of his camera, I hope people find a way to relate to the subject, even if you don't feel you're physically or mentally like them. So
do you feel like these pictures still illustrate something not just about the West in the mid-1980s, but the West and perhaps the United States more broadly now?
I think so. Admittedly, I've not spent too much time in the West, so I don't want to speak for them, but I think so. You know, there's a lot of people just doing everyday jobs and everyday work, and the West is a very vast and still authentic kind of place, I believe, to core values and humble beginnings. And yeah, I think it would still be relevant today. Yeah.
And just finally then, to the question of editing, it was something with the original project, this 1,000+ images down to 126. You, I think, have winnowed it down further to 21. As you embarked on that process, what was your criteria?
It was very important to me to kind of shed some light on the images that have not been shown since the 1985 debut. There are a lot of familiar faces that we have, the bee-man, the coal miners, things like that, but there are some incredible subjects that just have not had their chance to kind of speak for themselves, and so that was incredibly important to me. And the other thing that was important was getting some of the younger subjects. I'm really hoping to, elicit conversation from a younger generation with Grandpa's work. That's very important to me.
Caroline Avedon, thank you for joining us on The Briefing. The Richard Avedon Facing West exhibit is open from tomorrow at the Gagosian in London. It goes through March 14th. And that is all for this edition of The Briefing. It was produced by Laura Kramer and Ryuma Takahashi. Our researcher was Annalise Maynard and our studio manager was Christy O'Grady. The Briefing returns tomorrow at the same time, midday London. I'm Andrew Muller. Thanks for listening.